order. Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
Everybody's really lively. I hear that.
Good morning, Mr. Chair.
A roll call. Let the record show that all commissioners are present today. Staff, are there any changes you'd like to recommend to the agenda? I do understand there is one.
Yes, we have one. We're because of the busy agenda that we have today, moving item 6F, the drought update, to consent. It's a pretty detailed staff report there, and we've been talking pretty intensely every month about that, but we're here to answer any questions if there is questions about the drought update, but just kind of free up some time and move it to consent.
Does anyone in the commission have a problem in moving that to consent today? Not hearing.
Will you be covering the operation of the desal plant in the manager's report?
I'd be happy to.
Okay, well, if that was something that was in 6F, as long as we're getting it someplace else, then I'm fine moving it to consent.
Okay, so let the record show that we are moving 6F to consent. Takes us to item 4. This is public comment. Any member of the public can speak to the Water Commission on items which are not on our current agenda today. Does anyone wish to speak under this particular item? Not seeing or hearing any. It takes us right into the consent calendar. There are now 4 items. Item A, the meeting minutes, the approval of the minutes of May 17th, 2018. Item B, the contract for design of Gibraltar Dam inundation mapping project. Item C, contracts for construction support for fiscal year 2018 wastewater main rehabilitation project in design for fiscal year 2019 project. And item 6F, which is now item D, the drought update. Any questions and comments on any of those 2 items? Anybody wish to pull any one of those at this point?
I just have a quick question.
Okay, I have a question here and here.
Any questions?
Go ahead, Michael, and then Barry.
So I just had a question on the language on the inundation study. Is the $46,000 for the project or just for design services to get to a project?
Good morning, Mr. Chair and Commissioner Jordan.
Morning.
This project is to produce an inundation map.
Okay.
That's the entire project, and it is in response to from the state, from the Oroville failure, and we'll be doing that. And along with that, there was a separate project to evaluate all of our spillways. That work is still underway. So any further work coming from the state mandate will be repairs the mandated by, that we are discovered because of the investigation of the spillways. But once this inundation map is complete, we will send it to the state.
The way you phrase that in the first paragraph as design work, it's just confusing with other projects that start out in design and end up to actual project. It's not. It wasn't really clear to me that that's the entire cost of the end result, the inundation map study.
You make a really good point. We'll change that in the final council agenda report that we send forward. But thank you.
Good. Barry?
Perhaps this question addressed something that's actually in there and I've forgotten, but is there an existing inundation map?
Yes, Mr. Chair and Councilmember Keller, there isn't an existing inundation map, and it's a paper map that was done in 1973 by Mr. Stubchair, who was here earlier and gave a presentation. The format of the map in the paper form is not sufficient to meet the state's requirements, so they want an upgraded digital map.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Keller, our inundation map, nothing has really changed on the San Ynez River and that portion, so it was a little kind of frustrating. They have to go through this process again to digitize it, but we don't expect there to be any significant changes because there hasn't been any development in that area.
Okay. No other questions? Do we have a motion on the consent calendar?
I move approval.
Second.
A motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Consent calendar is unanimously approved. Takes us to item 6A, contract services for wastewater rate study. Staff?
Good morning.
Lisa.
Good morning, Lisa Arroyo, Wastewater System Manager. I'll be presenting the contract services for the wastewater rate study. In today's presentation, I'll be talking about the study objectives, our selection process, the timeline, and our recommendation. Throughout the presentation, you'll be seeing slides of various activities that we do in wastewater. This one demonstrates the enormous amount of construction that we have going on at the plant. It's a picture of our secondary process improvements project where they are working on one of the aeration basin walls. The study of the objectives for our rate study are, first of all, to prepare a 10-year financial plan. It will look at the revenues needed over the next 10 to 25 years and assess the needs based on our debt, our current and proposed, our operational and maintenance needs, our capital program, as well as building adequate reserves. We are trying to strike a balance between our rate sensitivity, not raising rates too much, but making sure that we are addressing our capital needs. Last month, you may recall that I came to the commission and we talked about our recent master plan for El Estero, and we've outlined about $75 million worth of improvements over the next 25 years. The second portion of the rate study will be to determine, do a cost of service analysis. We'll be taking a look at all of the various customer classes, as well as our flows and our strength of our wastewater, and making sure that we are allocating costs accordingly to each customer class based on cost of service. Then we'll be looking at our rate structure, and we'll be making sure that we develop a rate structure that is fair and equitable among all customer classes and is in compliance with Prop 218 and other applicable laws. And finally, we'll be putting together a report summarizing all of the work that went into our rate study. As part of the selection process, we issued requests for proposals to 10 firms on April 27th. 8 firms responded. The proposals were due June 7th. We interviewed our top 4 2 days ago. We don't have an actual finalist yet. We've narrowed it down to 2 firms. We will be doing additional work to talk to references to try to get it narrowed down to our top firm. At this point in time, we do know that the proposal itself will be about $100,000 for the work. And our timeline is to go to City Council in July with an award of a contract. I believe it's July 31st we're scheduled at Council. The work will start in August. We do have an aggressive schedule. We would like to do all of the foundation work with coming back to the full Water Commission in February with our rate study as part of our annual rate increases. This next year we're hoping that we will do multi-year as part of the rate study, and then we will end up at Finance Committee in March and adopting in June of 19, and that will be for fiscal years 2020. So while I don't have an actual firm to recommend to you today, we are recommending that you you support staff's recommendation to authorize a professional services contract for the rate study. We know it's going to be approximately $100,000, and we won't have an opportunity to be back in front of the commission between now and when we go to council.
Great.
And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions?
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
the largest individual rate increase that I can remember was following the Channel Keeper suit a few years back. So 2 questions. 1, do we have residual rate impacts from that raise? And 2, will the study include the possibility for more sort of outside attacks like that affecting our rate structure?
So as far as residual, I'm assuming you're saying buildup of revenues. I'm wanting to make sure I understand the question.
I don't recall us ever rolling the rates back as saying the process ended, so now we can give everybody a 6 or 8% reduction. So presumably that rate increase is still incorporated in our rates, which have increased more since then.
Correct.
So just wondering what impact that has to our rate structure.
Well, we have been doing ongoing rate increases for at least the last several years. And this year we are at a 6% increase, so it continues to rise with cost of service plus outstanding capital needs to rejuvenate the plant, as well as when we had the severe drought, there was a portion of time where we were raising rates. However, because of the large volumetric component in our residential rates, we were not seeing the rate increases in the form of revenue. So I'm hoping I'm answering your question.
Commissioner Keller, with the consent decree, part of that commitment was to additional work in the collection system, and I think at this point we had to raise rates in order to do that, and we continue to do that work and don't see any change in that. What we're finding with our investigation, CCTV investigation, is there is ample work that needs to be done in the collection system, and I think our current budget continues to allocate those resources to do that. And so at this point, I don't anticipate any reduction in the amount of work going into the collection system.
Thank you.
Good. Michael?
So I'm sure I'll get off on a tangent here, but so when you do these studies, and of course the rate structure always applies back to capital infrastructure too. And there's an item in consent that we went by talking about wastewater, the wastewater stuff. And you treat tangible stuff on the ground as an asset management program, right, where you grade it, and it's going to, I imagine it's just a process, and you end up with what you need. And then when you develop a rate study, or when you go through the process of a rate study that plays into how well you're going to be funding the infrastructure and the results of your asset management program, do you start with rates that will answer that entirely, or do you start with rates that you think are more sensitive to ratepayers or the political realities? Where does that end up? Do we ever start with exactly what we need, or when we end up with a rate study, are we below what we need already just because of the writing on the wall?
So where we would propose, and where our consultants are proposing we start with, is what revenues are needed, first of all, to fund our program as a whole. And that includes the capital. And then you build your rates around those.
And is the capital, in my example, in direct relationship to the results of your asset management program? So you're not saying right at the start that our asset management program says we should be replacing this every so often, but we think we can only do it less often than that, and that's how we're going to back into the process, or do the rates, the process that initially starts at 100% funding?
It would start at 100% funding for, and that's part of the reason why we did the facility plan, is really to help lay out what is needed as far as capital improvements, especially at the plant where they are very costly, and to base those on asset management principles, which are consequence of failure, likelihood of failure, and tie it around that. And so that started the foundation for the work that we will now continue to build on for our revenue
I think you get a
plan.
sense of where my interest is. Just seems like we're always playing catch up, and I don't know if that's just inherent of what's today is today, and we just inherently, the projections never work out as bad as they actually become, or we won't over project and then pull back, and it just seems a shame we're always perpetuating the frame of reference as if what's working well on the ground is working well and being fully funded, when I would have a different opinion probably. So
I feel like we're finally getting to is recognizing this ongoing need for maintenance. I think for, unfortunately, many years, and the city's not alone, we've enjoyed these investments that were done in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. There's a lot of capital infrastructure that was built to support a growing community.
Right.
And once that was put in, it really wasn't recognized that all this stuff is going to ultimately need to be replaced at approximately, what interval. And I think given the investment we've made in asset management, we've got a much better feeling now of what's out there, and kind of now what we need to kind of do annually to keep up with that replacement. And I think some of the challenges we have is we do have a big bubble going through the system, a large part of it being kind of the baby boomer generation and a lot of the infrastructure that was put in there. So it's trying to address that, spread that out so that when we go to replace it again, we don't have that same big bubble. But we recognize that with the water mains, sewer system infrastructure has some similarities there. But ultimately, yes, we're hoping that this is kind of starting to turn that corner that we're.
It's not unique to water. It's
Yeah.
bridges and
Right.
roads and
Right.
sidewalks and
Right.
everything else, buildings and same. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Other questions? Megan?
So the last 10-year study was in 2014, and even in the presentation, you said something along the lines of, we're going to try to have this be a multi-year rate study. I realize that part of this is always changing, so I'm wondering, do we invest $100,000 on a 10-year rate study? Is that the best plan, or is it less than that on a shorter time period that we recognize we're going to be redoing this in a shorter time frame? Because it seems like we're always coming back to these rates and we're paying all this money for this really long-term vision, which we have to come back to a year, 2 years, 4 years later, not 10 years later. So I'm just wondering, is this time frame really the right time frame, and are there things that we're putting in place in this rate study that really does ensure it is a 10-year rate study and we do have multi-year rates attached to it? I'm just wondering what the right answer is there. I'm not sure.
Chair Davis, when I said try, part of it was because of the schedule. It is we do have an aggressive schedule, and I'm hoping we can have this in time to set rates for next year. So that was part of the try. I think we're going to have to look at what with the 10-year with the 10-year master plan that we put together. We assumed some debt funding. We assumed to help smooth the rates, and because they're very large projects. And if SRF funding or bond funding is not available for us and we have to replace infrastructure, that could be a potential fatal flaw.
I think to kind of add to that, we're going to look at 10 years. We're going to draw in what needs to happen in the next 25 years. So we're going to be looking out, but ultimately we'll likely adopt rates that are going to be for the next 3, depending on how comfortable the commission feels, 3 to 5 years, somewhere in that time frame, because we feel comfortable that we do need to check in and see how we're doing. But you should have a long range plan. This is going to develop that long range. This is what you need to be doing over the next 10 years. That doesn't mean that we're adopting 10 years worth of rates. We're going to adopt probably the next 3 to 5 and then check in. Hopefully there hasn't been any huge changes, but if there has, we're making some changes to the rates going forward and just making sure that we're consistent with that long-term plan.
And I'm not thinking we should set 10-year rates. I'm more thinking, we have a 10-year plan. Let's either make the plan with enough factors that when things change, because we know they will, the plan can still be in place in one iteration. Or we shift it back to do a smaller plan that's more more known. So I guess it just seems like if we're going to do another 10-year plan 4 years after our last 10-year plan, we should make sure it's actually a 10-year plan or do something less if we don't feel confident. If there's too many uncertainties in the 10-year plan, then maybe we do something smaller.
I think also part of what we're going to try and accomplish with this, and that'll be part of the policy input, is how can we come up with something that'll be a little more stable. And I mean, there's some most wastewater agencies charge a flat rate, and certainly adds a lot of stability to those wastewater rates as conservation changes, as economy changes. You have a very consistent revenue source. We here have a little bit more of an emphasis on water conservation, so as people use less, they pay less on their wastewater bill. That doesn't really necessarily line up with our expenses. Our expenses don't necessarily go down dramatically as people send us less waste. So I think some of those are some of the policy changes that we look at that would help stabilize that in the long term, as maybe we look to have more of a fixed component.
Good question. Other questions?
I was just going to
Mike?
make a comment. I kind of had the same concerns that Commissioner Burney had about the 10-year plan, because I know the last plan we had rate increases between 5% and 6%, and I think we're still doing that. So it would be, I guess, if we go through this process and it turns out that that's the same recommendation, then, what was the point of going through the 10-year process again? So just want to make sure that we're keeping that in mind when we're doing this.
Okay. Okay, well, we're at the point. The recommendation is to authorize professional service contract for the wastewater rate study to the city council.
I'll move recommendation of the staff report.
I'll second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you, Lisa. Takes us right into the adjunct item, the appointment of wastewater rate study ad hoc subcommittee members. Joshua or Lisa, you want to add anything to the staff report?
Yeah, just this is our first move into having the Water Commission participate in ad hoc, and I know as a staff level, we're kind of excited to have a little more detailed engagement on some of these issues. Certainly, just checking in once a month, and there's a lot going on, can be rather challenging, and so we're kind of excited to try this out. And we've got, of course, several other items that we're looking to do the same, but this would be a two-person committee. We'd be meeting as needed basis on the specific topic of the development of the rates for 2020 fiscal year.
Okay, interest by commissioners.
Okay.
What was that?
Okay.
Michael?
No good deed goes unpunished.
Right. Hey, we have one. Anyone wish to join him?
Apparently not.
I was going to volunteer for the sea level rise one, but if somebody else wants it.
I can join in on this one.
Okay, Mike and Michael. Okay, let the record show.
Mike's
The two
working
mics.
on rates.
That's right. I like
Say
it.
that Mike said that, right?
Good. Okay.
I would make a bad engineering joke of Mike squared, but
There you go.
We'd all laugh anyway. Okay, very good. That takes us then to item C. The agreement with Marburg Industries for delivery of fats, oils, and grease materials. Back to Lisa.
all right, thank you. This is the agreement with Marburg for FOG delivery services. FOG does stand for fats, oils, and grease. In today's presentation, I'll be taking you through the background, the proposed agreement, next steps, and the recommendation. And this is a picture of our FOG facility. Just a little background, restaurants are required to divert FOG, their fats, oils, and grease. This is a typical layout that you might see a restaurant have where their FOG receiving, or their grease trap, which looks like this, is outside. It is a great program because it diverts the fog from going into the sewer lines and causing spills. This is what, when you open up the container, the fog looks like. This is what we're talking about. Fog does cause sewer spills, and this graph really shows how much fog we've been receiving at our plant over the last several years, from 2015 on. Last month alone, we are about 68,000 gallons worth of fat, oil, and grease that out of the sewer pipes and into our receiving station by Marburg. One of the benefits to the fog receiving station is it allows the fog haulers, the people who are collecting it from the restaurants, prior to us installing our receiving station, they used to have to truck it out of county, or out of city at least, and out of county. Some of the places where they would accept fog would be as far away as Bakersfield, Los Angeles, and Fresno. So this has been a very beneficial program for us. The pilot project, it was constructed in 2013. Here you see one of Marburg's trucks. I believe this is one of the first times that they delivered fog to our new receiving station. You'll see that I apologize, I don't have it all in one shot, but this is where they're connecting up to their truck, and then they're going to be, we'll be receiving it at that connection point. Once we receive it, it goes into the holding tank, which you see there, and then it's eventually injected into the digesters. The digesters are just behind that big white holding tank. Inside the digesters, bacteria is going to break it down and produce methane gas. The methane gas then goes through these pipes, and this is our cogen facility. Those tanks are going to be cleaning up the gas. Then it'll go through reciprocating engines, and it will produce the methane gas. The methane gas is then gets turned into electricity, and the electricity goes back up to the front of the plant to power our plant, or a portion of it. When Marburg was initially selected, they were selected for several reasons. They were selected because of their proximity, their ability to pre-treat. They were willing to invest into the infrastructure needed to pre-treat. Some of the requirements are a pH requirement between 6 and 9, screening. They also have to keep the fog in at an acceptable temperature so it doesn't congeal and get hardened. And also their ability to work with the city. So we started this partnership several years ago. Here are the benefits. This is a sewer pipe that has grease in it. It provides our restaurants and our haulers local disposal, keeps it out of the collection system. And the reason I keep talking about keeping it out of the collection system so much is, you may recall last month when I was here talking about the annual collection system report, we've really seen a decrease in our fog-related spills. And I think it's a combination of things. It's our outreach and our work with our fog inspectors, but it's also because we have a place for us to have our restaurants dispose of it locally. And so we've really seen a decrease in those spills. Plus, we're seeing increased gas production at the plant. We do have limitations at the plant. That's part of the reason why we can't go full scale yet. We can't take more than what we are already. One of the biggest limitations we have is our ability to flare. That's our candlestick flare. It is a safety device. It is what allows us to flare that methane gas, that combustible gas, if we need to. We don't turn it on very often, but if cogen goes down, we don't really have any storage. We don't have a lot of ability to get rid of this methane gas. We always have to call Marburg when we are doing shutdowns and say, don't bring us any fog right now, because we do run that risk. And so we cannot take any more until we address the flare. We're going to have to do a lot of permitting if we need to and want to take more fog. But the other big piece of this is the electrical distribution system. Currently, we are backfeeding our cogen through one of our substations. It is substation D, pictured right here, and to get it to the front of the plant. We have limitations with that, and our electrical distribution project, which is slated to go into design this fall, will help address those problems. But in the short term, we're about at our max at what we can do. We are proposing to go forward with Marburg for a 6-month extension. At the time we were negotiating Marburg's contract, another grease hauler came forward and said that they could perform these services. So we ended up talking and having to reduce to a 6-month extension so that we could send it out to a competitive process. They are going to be under contract until October 31st, as they are now. It will go to a month-to-month contract after that. But the proposal really is to put out an RFP process, a competitive process where we can open it up and allow any grease haulers who could meet our requirements to participate. We would propose, we're going to council in July of 2018 with our 6-month Marburg agreement. We will be putting out requests for proposals in about August, and then that'll get us through the short term. And then long term, we're looking at going to October of 2019. We'll be here with the longer term contract. We're expecting that to be about 5 years, with the timing with the electrical project, which we would see construction of those improvements and the ability to hopefully take a lot more fog in the future around July 2023. So just to kind of recap, we're doing a 6-month with Marburg right now. We'll open it up for RFPs with a longer term based on competitive process in October. And then timing, we're hoping will be just right with the electrical project. At this point, we're asking for you to support staff's recommendation to do a 6-month agreement with Marburg. It is scheduled at City Council in July. I believe it's July 10th. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Are there any immediate questions?
Mr. Chairman, I believe that there are some people who collect something which may be fog or a similar substance from restaurants and make sort of homemade biodiesel and run cars on it. So are they getting that out of the grease traps that you showed, or is there an impact on people that are doing that from the fog program?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Keller, I'm not sure how they're getting it. I would assume that we know there are other grease haulers, and maybe they are selling it to the people who make the biodiesel. I'm not sure about their agreement.
Thank you.
Megan?
Do we know what the unmet demand for a local place to put fog is?
We don't, and that's kind of what we're, I guess, excited to find out in this RFP. I guess for the most part, we thought Marburg was the only game in town. They're the only ones who had approached us beforehand, and so we didn't feel like there was any reason to put out an RFP. And so when we did find out that there was another interested party, we are very eager to see what kind of material is out there. It certainly will help us to understand what in 2023, when we finally do finish up all of our projects, what kind of potential fog material we might be looking at.
And then for the contract, the RFP that's going to be coming out, is it going to be a single contractor or multiple contractors?
That is a great question.
We're still working on that. One of the things that we're exploring is certainly we to the extent we can by law, we'd like to preference any material coming from the city, because we do know Marburg does services outside of the city. So we would like to preference city material first going into the facility. I don't know how legally. I know there's intercommerce trade agreements, kind of stuff that you can't limit that. But we are looking to try and maximize the amount of haulers that we could get delivering, as long as they can meet the criteria for pre-treatment and delivery to the facility, because it does increase the number of traffic now coming to the plant. And you've been there. It's a kind of a postage stamp and difficult to get vehicles around. So we want to also kind of juggle that as well.
So if you had multiple haulers, then would you have like a cap on each hauler? Is
Well,
that
we
the
have a
idea,
cap
or-
now with Marburg. It's
I believe it's about 5,000 per day.
5,000 gallons a day. Yeah.
Okay.
So we'll be working within probably that same cap.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting that there are multiple haulers, and it's good to have, options for people. But I do just wary of how we would split that. But also interested in what the capacity or what the demand is in the county, and what we could actually get that fog up and doing in 5 or so years. Thanks.
Michael?
So if there's a generator in town, we're collecting fog. It's a requirement, and we know that we're collecting it. A restaurant or any other generator of fats, oils, or greases, it's a requirement that it be diverted, right? And do we know that it's all being diverted and collected?
Correct. We have a fog inspector who goes around to all the
Okay.
food establishments.
And then how much of that can we not deal with when you have these situations where you have electrical or burning issues or capacity issues over, say, the course of the last year? How often, how much do you have to turn away?
Yeah.
So I don't know that I have a concept of that, because we know we have multiple haulers, and we only know what we're allowing Marburg to give us. So I don't have a great concept of how much of their business is in our city, so to speak,
Okay.
versus out.
The other-
I don't have a good feel for
Their
it.
haulers are being arranged for by the business directly? Okay, so there's no requirement that a business utilize Marburg?
No.
Okay. And then, so it would be reasonable to assume, too, that some of that is still being trucked out of town, of course, then, right?
That's correct.
Okay. And then, if you're going to take 3 to 5 years to get up to where you want to be from a capacity handling point, why would you want to go through the trouble of an RFP now rather than wait till you kind of had all your ducks in a row for that?
I was unaware until very recently that there was even the existence of more haulers.
Okay.
And we feel that at this point, we do need to have a fair and competitive process for anyone who is able to meet those requirements
Okay.
that Marburg is held to.
Okay, thanks.
Barry?
Does Marburg have a reaction to this suggestion?
Actually, I have a comment from Anthony Borgatello, who's going to speak.
Okay.
Any other questions? Kristen? And then Mike.
I believe we also had a letter to read into public comment.
Item,
Yeah.
the next item.
For the fog?
It's for the private submetering item.
No, it was sent to you and to me to be read into the record from the competitive bidder. Maybe yesterday or the day
The
before.
commission didn't see it.
It was sent, it was requested that we forward it to
Good
be read
question.
into the record.
Was it Art Luck? No?
No, it was from our competitive bidder.
I didn't get anything yesterday.
Oh, and it's not with me. I think it's very important. He spoke at City
Yeah.
Council and then asked where else he could speak and was recommended to speak here, and he was out of town for this meeting, sent a letter that he requested to be read into the public record, which we confirmed. I can check for it. I
will
don't have
look
it with me right now. It was sent to Mr. Hagmark and myself.
Oh, so I wouldn't have.
Let me
gotten
go
it.
to Mike with his question
Okay.
while we resolve that other issue. Mike, you have a question?
Yeah, or a question, comment, I guess. I was just thinking, like, if we're looking at these future upgrades to increase the capacity of the cogen facility, I feel like we don't really have a handle on, obviously, what is being generated in the city as far as fog goes. Maybe we need to put together some sort of study or something that looks at that, because I would say the ultimate goal here wouldn't it be to have a cogen facility that could accept whatever comes in on a daily basis from whoever the hauler might be, whether it's Marburg or somebody else.
Yes, that would be great. Where we may end up running into additional problems would be digester capacity as well. This will get the low-hanging fruit, so to speak, allow us to increase up to our digester capacity and be able to use it because of the electrical distribution. There will be a point where we will run out of digester capacity as well.
Okay.
So we'll have to balance it all.
Right, that makes sense.
Okay, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to public comment. I'll ask Anthony if he can make his comments now, and then we could read the letter into the record if we need to do that. Okay? Anthony, come over to the microphone. Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Anthony Borgatello. I am the general manager for the Liquid Waste Division at Marburg Industries. And I wanted to come today to talk a little bit about the staff report and a very important fact that's missing in the staff report. Early 2018, Marburg received a 5-year agreement with the city to continue hauling fog. And Marburg signed that agreement and returned it to the city. And upon that signing of that agreement, we immediately started to improve our receiving station, and we spent thousands of dollars. Recently, we received a phone call from the city and then a letter stating that, no, it's not going to be a 5-year deal. It's going to be a 6-month deal and then a month-to-month after that as presented today. And quite honestly, it was a shot below the belt in our opinion. Marburg has been with this program, spent a lot of money as a partner in the pilot program, and it's one of those things where, you know, we have a partnership and then all of a sudden we don't have a partnership because somebody, you know, says they can do it. Marburg has a proven track record. We provide as much fog as they want. There's not a shortage on our end. A matter of fact, one of the large investments that we need to do is to redo our tanks so that we can store material and we can keep it heated and whatnot. And I'm kindly asking the commission to take under consideration that an agreement was sent to us, which was signed by us. It was not signed by the city. But to have this, it was just a low blow. And Marburg's a little troubled by the decision of going to a 6-month and a month-to-month. Thank you.
Good. Thank you very much for comment.
Couple questions?
We have a question.
Mr. Borgatello? So I'm the last guy who knows anything about the financial dynamics of fog, but you're actually, you're lobbying to stay in a situation where you're paying the city for delivering fog. So you must take the other fog that you don't deliver to the city and sell that or somehow make money on it, right?
We do not. We store it. Our collecting the fog is very up and down. So we have not all of the grease traps are that small that was in that picture. We have some hotels and whatnot in Santa Barbara that might have 10,000 gallons, 5,000 gallons, 2,000 gallons. So, you know, we try to schedule it so that we stay somewhat constant, but we do have to store a lot of this, and we do have to heat the material and keep it mixed and everything else to provide a good product to the city. And so are you taking fog elsewhere? No, we're not.
So
no, we're not. We're storing it.
Your process is to collect, deliver what they need, store the balance, deliver what they need, that type
Correct.
of thing. So why are you paying the city for that?
That's a good question. No, no, I think it's a, you know, I believe that it's a win-win situation. If we didn't have the city to take it, prior to that, we were hauling it all the way to Bakersfield.
Okay.
But I believe that because of Marburg's reputation and our proximity, I mean, we are a quarter of a mile away from the plant. Although it is expensive to run the plant, our mini plant, before we bring it to the city over there. I mean, you know, can you imagine what it costs to heat up, 20,000 gallons of material and keep it at a operating temperature? So it is a win-win. For both parties, and we're set up, and like I said, we went and being based on the fact that we thought we were going to be doing this for another 5 years, spent thousands of dollars in doing it, and now get the rug pulled out of underneath us.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions?
No, I'm good. I guess,
Christian?
You could keep in there for a second. Do you have a different response for why the vendor pays the city to bring something that he's not trucking out of town and only providing the city? Why aren't we paying the vendor for the service? Why is the vendor paying us for the service?
Well, I think it's a matter of there's a market for it, and
Okay.
it's either they pay to take it out of town or they pay us to keep
In
it
a
in
particular
town.
case, they don't.
It's
So
the payment is pretty small. But,
Okay. All right.
I think in wanting to recognize it, I'd say I agree with. I think their frustration is well grounded. I'm as too kind of frustrated that we were unaware that there were anybody else out there that was interested, because we knew that we've been doing this now since 2013 and no one's come forward to say, hey, I'm interested in that work, and it's kind of specialized. So we didn't expect there to be anybody out there. So to that end, I share his frustration. I share the frustration that, unfortunately we didn't know that there were
So would
others out
the
there.
RFP potentially also contain a requirement that it must remain in the city?
That's the part that we're not sure legally we can stipulate that all fog material. that
Actually,
we-
you could rate or grade based on some
We're-
environmental consideration of greenhouse gases, of trucking stuff out versus storing it here, right?
We're working on something that would be fair, and I don't, Marburg, you're taking in fog from all over the county, so I don't know that stipulating just city would really be ideal in your situation as well. I mean, that would be a hindrance in a significant way, because I'm
Yeah, I
understanding.
mean, I haven't really dug into it, but I doubt that there's enough fog within just the city to keep up with the demand that the current permit calls for.
All right.
I would
Thank
be
you.
surprised if
Sorry.
there was.
Kristen?
Thank you. I just had a couple questions about how much of your fog is from the city and how much is from county or beyond that you're bringing to the city for disposal? Is it
I don't have that
percentage-wise or even?
percentage-wise. I would hate to
That's
go
okay,
on
yeah.
record to state,
But it is coming from larger region than locally. You're collecting fog. How big is the area?
We have a few accounts in Santa Maria, very, very few, and very, very few in Ventura. Majority of it is the Santa Barbara County.
In the county,
right
and then where do you take? If it's okay to ask, where do you take the excess that you are not bringing to the city?
Again, we do not haul anything. We pump it, store it at our facility, and
So
discharge to the city when.
So the city is sufficient for your needs, for your disposal needs.
Yeah, we could actually bring them more. Like I said, we're storing I wish there was a picture of it. I mean, we have right now, I believe it's in excess of 50,000 gallons of fog that we're storing, and we deliver. I mean, it's just it's a puzzle to keep product out, product in. So I mean, that's part of this whole thing. If somebody's going to come in and build a fog thing and think that they're going to do it with 10,000 gallons or 20,000 gallon holding capacity, it's not going to work. And I guess that's part of the frustration. I mean, we're set up, we're doing a good job, like the staff report says, and we're talking pennies here. So I guess, again, going back on my soapbox, the city is going to spend a bunch of money to do an RFP to find out what. There are other haulers. There are hundreds of them. They come from all over California to come into Santa Barbara to haul fog. But what's the point of doing it over a couple pennies here or there, or potentially losing a company that is providing a great service to the city, that is giving you guys a really good product, and that's a quarter of a mile down the road.
Mm-hmm. I believe we'll have the letter read in, but I believe in this case it's a local who has a small percentage that it would be sharing the percentage. I mean, who knows until the RFP goes out? But I don't believe the intention of the city is to have it open to beyond our perimeter and bringing it in from all over. I'm just curious, how much did Marburg invest in the infrastructure for the fog facility?
The original infrastructure to get that pilot, I don't have that exact number, but I do know it was over $100,000 to build our existing fog. And we're probably looking at the improvements that we want to make to it, probably looking at about another $6,000, $7,000.
So that's for your facilities, but for the city facilities?
I have no idea what they spent.
I believe it was on the magnitude of 600,000 in that vicinity. We took out an SRF loan for it.
Oh, I think I don't understand. I thought Marburg contributed in some way to the infrastructure of the cities. No, so that's
We
not.
built our own.
You built
they
yours,
built their own.
and with the understanding that there would be a market for the fog that you are storing. No.
I
Okay.
guess I'm a little.
I guess I'm misunderstanding here in the report.
So maybe clarify. So, in order for our fog facility that we built to operate, there had to be some screening of the material that had to be done. And so, as I understand it, Marburg invested, they built their facility to heat and screen the material prior to bringing it to our fog facility. And so I think that's the clarification. So they had to make an investment on there. And otherwise, I think if you're hauling it off to, I don't know where else you take fog material, landfill, it doesn't require any screening or heating or anything like that.
No, there's other disposal sites that will take it that don't require the screening and heating of the product.
I see. So it wasn't an investment in city's infrastructure. It was in your facilities to be able to meet the requirements
Right.
of the city. Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions?
No, thank you very much, Anthony, for your comments.
So I might make a recommendation on the RFP process. If we are going to go through with that, maybe there needs to be some sort of pre-screening process that vets it before it actually goes out to a full-blown RFP. Because it sounds like they got to have cleaning capabilities. There's got to be some sort of minimum volume.
Correct, and we have talked to at least one other hauler who says that that's something they're prepared to do or are already doing. So I apologize. I did receive this email on Monday. It went into my junk folder. It was labeled Coastal Byproducts. It's kind of a generic title, and it's good morning and thank you to the Water Commission for giving me an opportunity to add my thoughts to the meeting regarding the city's fog and grease to energy program. As I explained to the City Council last month, my company, Coastal Byproducts, collects, recycles cooking oil from the majority of restaurants and other kitchen facilities throughout the Santa Barbara, Ventura, and San Luis Obispo counties. We are also the largest grease trap pumping company in the Santa Barbara area, and we pump the most grease trap waste from restaurants within the city itself. Coastal Byproducts has asked the City Council and Public Works to consider allowing our company to dump at El Estero now that the Grease to Energy pilot program between the city and Marburg has ended. Seeing as how Coastal Byproducts is the largest grease trap pumping company in the area, and the goal of the program is to use local grease trap waste to create local energy, at El Estero we have asked to be included in the city's Grease to Energy program. In response to the request, Public Works has decided to draft and issue a request for proposals from local grease trap pumping companies currently servicing customers within the city. I have been told by Public Works staff that El Estero has a daily limit of 5,000 gallons and that they only want to accept waste generated within the city of Santa Barbara. They have also mentioned that they want potential pumping companies to bid on what they are willing to pay per gallon for disposal. In my opinion, the statement seems to be somewhat conflicting. If the goal of the city's Grease to Energy program is to accept only grease trap waste collected within the city limits and to create power at El Estero, why would Public Works want to award the ability to dump to the highest bidder? The result of the policy would be then that the company would continue to be shut out from Grease to Energy programs, and 40 to 60% of the waste pumped within the city would not be eligible for treatment at El Estero. There's not enough total grease trap waste within the city limits for only one company to collect their share and dispose of El Estero if Public Works wants to maintain their power generation from this waste stream or attempt to maximize it. At this point, it is our understanding that Marburg is allowed to dump all their grease trap waste at El Estero, irrespective of where the waste originates. For Public Works to further limit disposal at El Estero to waste pumped within city limits, they have to accept material from both Coastal Byproducts and Marburg. We understand the city's desire to only process local grease trap waste at El Estero, but it would be counterproductive for them to award that privilege to just one company. According to local fog inspectors, Coastal Byproducts and Marburg are responsible for approximately 95% of grease trap pumping done within the city limits. If Public Works wants to ensure they have enough material for their Grease to Energy program, we would recommend setting a disposal tipping fee in advance with an eye on continuing to make it affordable for both pumping and companies to dump waste at El Estero. I would also recommend that Public Works staff consult with our wastewater treatment plants with other wastewater treatment plants and look carefully at any proposed pretreatment requirements to ensure they don't create costly and or time-consuming barriers that would further restrict the volume of material coming into El Estero. It has been our experience in working with wastewater treatment plants and going through RFPs with them that the tipping fee and any pretreatment requirements are spelled out in advance so companies can know what to expect and what the true cost for disposal will be. It is not the best interest of any wastewater treatment plant to make their requirements overly restrictive and expensive, and if they desire to have a constant volume of material. I would again like to thank the Water Commission for providing me with an opportunity to contribute to this discussion. Although I was unable to attend this meeting in person, I hope that my input is considered helpful in forming a successful Grease to Energy program in Santa Barbara. I have included my contact information below and would very much appreciate the opportunity to be involved in future discussions as this program moves forward. Sincerely, Mark Craig.
Thank you. Thank you for bringing that up also. I have a question, just to clarify for me, because I don't want to say I'm lost in the weeds. The RFP is going to be very difficult. I think it's going to be a difficult RFP to draft, number one, because I'm not sure that I understand what our goals are. Are we looking for a single collector? Are we looking for multiple collectors? Are we looking to qualify multiple collectors? How are we going to allocate the amount of the 5,000 between multiple collectors in terms of timing? Do we have a clear picture of what our, if I had to basically look forward, what is our end goal? What are we looking for in terms of the end result of that RFP, in terms of number of collectors, allocations, et cetera?
To the extent the law will allow, it is to prioritize city fog material.
Okay.
And to the extent we can maximize our facility, that's what we'd like to do, without deterring any future fog material, hopefully when we have the capacity, from also coming to the city. So it is, you're correct, and I think it is a very difficult RFP to draft, but that is our goal, is to try and figure out how we can prioritize city fog material. Okay. And again, keeping in mind that they are our customers, and we're not trying to get carried away with charging for delivery, but trying to figure out an equitable way to make that occur.
Megan?
I just have I feel like that's one of those the best intentions. Mr. Borgatello is telling us about this facility he built, and I can just imagine us saying, oh, it needs to be prioritized the city, and now he's got to build a second facility and separate, and I don't think Coastal Byproduct would be okay with that either. So I just want us to be very careful about things that sound like an amazing idea, and I absolutely agree, that sounds like a great idea, but the actual implementation might just be astronomically impossible for the haulers. I also just want to be wary about having them getting in a bidding war because it doesn't sound like this, is a huge economic aspect for us. But also at the same time, if funds can be utilized to increase the capacity of the system, then that might be something that we should look at. So I just want to be careful about kind of intentions versus practicality around this.
So just to be clear, what our real action today is to recommend a 6-month contract. That's the only thing we really are moving forward. What is the process for the review of the RFP itself?
Typically, we would have, especially in this case, our attorneys review it. It would go through multiple staff level reviews.
But it won't come back to us or to the council before it goes out?
Not in a typical situation, we wouldn't necessarily do that.
We certainly, if that's an interest to the commission, we could bring it back. It would delay getting it out, but we could bring it back for
the
more
only reason
discussion.
I ask is, again, one, I think it's difficult. Two, I think from a policy standpoint, the goals need to be pretty clear. What are we trying to achieve here without unintended consequences and ending up in a situation where it was a good idea, but in fact it's got unintended consequences. Michael, and then Chris.
So I take that and exponentially make it a little worse. The way the staff recommendation is, I'm not going to be able to support it. I think this is premature. I would rather see us on this 3 to 5 year path of getting our ducks in a line before we're ready then to proceed in the manner that you're kind of laying out in this RFP. Now that I've asked a couple questions, really all this is Marburg is picking up trash and they're being allowed to dispose of the trash with us. That's why they're paying us. Right. And somebody else is apparently also picking up this kind of trash and disposing it somewhere else. And it's clear also that we don't know how much trash output there is out there in the city, but we do know we can't handle it all. And I would like to see us go through this process once where that would be true. Something else that's hasn't even been spoken on is what's the impact to the guy on the street who's generating the product and the rates he's paying for Marburg or this other company or any other company to pick up, and is all you're doing essentially the process we've gone through with the separation of trash and recycled. You're just entering a process that's just going to pass along a rate increase to every restaurant or fog generator in town, and put your hands up and say it wasn't my fault. So I'm not happy with where it is today. Eventually, a couple of things that I would insist that be part of something I would support would be that it's it retains its local characteristics. So you're picking it up local, you're disposing it local, and the company you're dealing with has the capacity to store, use, whatever that means. So it is not being trucked out of town, say like food compost byproducts that can only go out of town. And that there's some talk on oversight of rate impact to the customers, because that's essentially what you're doing. You're making a contract with a third party who's then going to pass along those rate consequences to the restaurants in town. And I think that, just like what I pay for trash or recycling, that should be a public discussion and an acknowledgement of what that's going to mean. So I'd like to see some more work done on this. And if I'm in the minority, I would also endorse seeing that RFP come back for input from Water Commission if we move forward on
Well,
this.
I actually was going to say, what we really have here is continue a short-term contract with Marburg to allow them to dump, which I don't know that I don't have an objection to that. But I also would like to see the RFP goals and objectives come back to us before it basically is then formalized to go out, and that we have a clear discussion on that point.
Well, I guess, so just,
Go ahead.
I guess I'd be a little more specific. If there really was a letter or an offer put out for another year to Marburg, I think that would be appropriate to honor that and then continue to work on this project.
Kristen?
I just had a question and then a comment, but do you keep track of where your collections come from? Like how much is collected from each location and whether those are within the city or beyond the city? So you would have a record of how much is collected internally, yeah. And I would imagine that any other company would have the same. And perhaps the RFP could just be simple based on how much is collected within the city, the actual amount, and prioritizing that amount that's collected within the city, and not increasing rates, not having a bidding war, not passing that on to local businesses. But I think that's maybe the intention of this RFP is, from my understanding, and I will say I've had conversations with Mark Craig, and he's not here, and so I'm not advocating for him, but I do feel like I have some information that he has shared that I don't know if it's appropriate to mention here or not. But from what I understand, just from him, and this is not, again, not my position, that he's a local operator collecting locally and is maybe requesting for a small piece of what is being deposited at El Estero, not the whole gig. And he wrote his own letter, so he can speak for himself there. But from my understanding, this isn't as big as there aren't going to be 100 people rallying for this RFP and getting into a bidding war. I think this only came up because one small operator who operates locally is trucking his stuff to Fresno, and that seems counter to the goals. And again, that is not my position. I'm
Yeah,
just
I actually
passing
want to
that
ask a
on.
question of Anthony, because I think some questions came up in that. Yeah, we're on TV, so you have to. So a question did come up. I'll direct that question to you.
Yeah. I have never been approached by Coastal Byproducts. I know who they are. If Mark would like to call me directly and sit down and talk about. There's nothing preventing him from dumping at our facility and still retaining the local waste and getting it to the city. There's nothing stopping that from happening. So if we're want to talk about that, I've got my phone on all the time.
I heard the comment premature, which I like. Megan?
I was actually going to try a recommendation if
Go ahead.
people are ready for it, to extend the Marburg contract through the end of 2018, and in that time period have an RFP come back to the commission so we can actually talk about goals and objectives for this project.
And that would also give time for any discussion which happens in the community
Correct.
itself.
Correct.
Okay, that is a motion. I'll second it if nobody else will.
I'll second it. Yeah,
No,
I'm
I-
on board with that. I mean, I think we got to have something in place with somebody at this point. So this kind of gives us some time to work on,
Yeah.
like you said, the goals and objectives of what we want to do in the future. So
Motion's clear that it's contract through, go ahead, Barry.
My impression is that Marburg has been acting in good faith through the whole process and doing a good job. And while the points made by the other gentlemen are something that you can sympathize with, as we've seen, it needs a little more refinement before we understand where this program's going and how it can be managed in the long run.
Good comment.
I would also add that Commissioner Bernie's recommendation really only adds 2 months to the staff recommendation and then throws the discussion of the RFP back in. And I still think I just think that's a bad faith investment on a firm that both personnel and structurally gamed up to their last years of participation in this, and there's nothing to be lost, I don't think, maybe legally, but other than that, gain a penny or two on the rate and increase 43,000 to 46,000. There's really nothing to be gained that I see to get past my word of premature in this particular case. So,
If it may help, I wanted to speak to the costs. We're certainly not looking to make this a moneymaker. This is really about trying to, I think, keep this local energy source here and utilize it to the full potential for our community. I think the fact that Coastal Byproducts has been successful in competing here by still sending it to Fresno kind of sets a threshold already. There's already a cap. If I'm not making any commitment right now on the financial side of it, but I'm not looking that the emphasis here is going to be on who's going to pay more to dump at the city. And I think because the backstop to this all is they'll continue to send it to Fresno, and that's a cost that has been competitive in the community. So I think we're really trying to find a way to really balance this. And in an RFP, it doesn't necessarily need to be based on the lowest price or the highest price someone's willing to pay. And so we'll be looking at all those factors, and I think bringing it back to the Water Commission for further discussion is. But just to talk a little bit to the timing of that. So July, I don't think we'll have something to bring back to the Water Commission yet in July.
We don't meet again in August.
We don't meet in August. It's really just a work session that we have. So it's really coming back in September, then releasing it in theory. It'll be out in October, get proposals back in November. So it'd likely be January, February timeframe before we'd really probably have something to sit down with the Water Commission again on. So
now you're almost back up to that April 2019 date on the original offer to Marburg, right? The letter that Mr. Borgatello.
It was a 5 year.
It was a 5 year.
Oh, it was 5 year. It was not 1 year.
No,
Okay.
it was a 5
All right.
year.
Okay.
Megan, would you, I just ask again, given the time frame here, perhaps basically making it a 9-month contract, which gives then adequate time for the RFP and everything else. I also want to just, a question, we're asking for this RFP draft or whatever discussion to come back to us. That doesn't mean that in fact we are buying into going out in that manner. We could go back out for we could be recommending a 5-year contract to Marburg at that point. Okay, so it isn't deciding that particular point, but it is giving time, one, to clarify those issues, and basically to continue the contract with Marburg adequate to whatever path we do take.
Happy to amend the motion to
Okay,
be 9 months.
yeah. I think I seconded it, so I'll accept that amendment. Okay, is everybody clear on the thing? We're talking a 9-month contract to Marburg, and the discussion of an RFP process and outline to come back to the commission. Is that correct? Okay, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed?
No.
Okay, motion passes 4-1.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for coming, Anthony. Takes us to item D, private submarine cross-connection control and miscellaneous changes to Title 14 of the municipal code.
Good morning. My name is Dana Hoffenberg. I'm a water resources specialist. And today I'm going to be talking to you about a proposed ordinance that we have that deals with private submetering and cross-connection control, as well as some other miscellaneous Title 14 language and policy updates. So again, the purpose of the proposed ordinance is to provide flexibility in our water metering policies by providing private submetering. It also creates some comprehensive code language to support the city's cross-connection control program and some miscellaneous updates and clarifications to existing Title 14 language and policies. So first we're going to be covering the private submetering portion of the ordinance. So some general background, the city has required individual water metering for dwelling units dating back to the early 90s. The state has now just caught up with us this year and is now requiring separate meters for dwelling units in a bill known as SB 7, and I will talk about that bill again later in the presentation. So again, our existing metering requirements, all city meters are required for new dwelling units and are generally located in the public right-of-way at the curb line of the street. However, there are some situations where space is limited in the right-of-way and we don't have enough room for all of the meters, especially with some of the really high-density projects that are coming in. So when that happens, when there's not enough space, we allow a city master meter to be installed at the street and to have city-owned read and maintained sub-meters located on private property in a centralized location, so in a meter room. So there are some issues with these existing requirements when we have city submeters. Having city infrastructure on private property is not the best situation. It requires us to have easements for private property, which can be a bit time-consuming to get, and just extra staff time. There can be access issues. Sometimes the meter rooms get locked or the codes get changed and so forth, and there's some issues getting to the sub-meters. And then there's some interesting plumbing configurations that get installed. Sometimes things are plumbed in between where the master meter is and where the sub-meters are. And then there's just issues since our city infrastructure is embedded between private plumbing. It can just be pretty problematic. The billing is also a big issue. We have to bill these separately. We have to pull them out of our regular billing cycles and manually bill them. They're also very glitchy, and it takes a lot of staff time to bill all of these properties. So our proposed solution is to instead move towards private submetering. So our general rule would stay the same, that all dwelling units have to have a city meter, and that city meter should be located in the public right-of-way. It's only when there's space that's limited in the right-of-way where we could then instead authorize private submetering. So in private submetering scenarios, the city would only read, bill, and maintain our city master meter. And the private submeters that serve the individual dwelling units would be billed, read, and maintained by the property owner or manager. So as I mentioned earlier, the state passed a bill in 2016 that became effective in January of this year. And it does require all new dwelling units be metered by either a utility meter or a private submeter. It also created the framework for us for private submetering, and it includes a lot of consumer protections. So it outlined a lot of the issues that could go along with private submetering and kind of resolved those issues for us. So under this new ordinance, private submetering would be allowed when there's not enough space in the public right-of-way for all of the city meters that are required for the project. Accessory dwelling units would be continued to be allowed to use private submeters. That was a policy that was already adopted in an earlier ordinance, and that would stay the same. Under this current ordinance, we would also be allowing an exemption for ultra-high water use efficiency projects. So certain projects that show that they're extremely water efficient would also be allowed to privately submeter if they could demonstrate to us through an independent rating institution that they are a very highly efficient water use project. Under this exemption, they would still only be limited to having 6 dwelling units per city master meter, which is consistent with some other exemptions that we have. So a little bit more on the independent rating institution. The institution that we're looking at right now is known as the Water Efficiency Rating Score, which is known as WERS. It's a third-party water-specific verifying tool, and it takes into consideration indoor and outdoor water usage as well as water reuse on a project. It has already been codified in the Santa Fe Residential Green Building Code, so all of Santa Fe's single-family homes are already required to go through the WERS program. And the Water Rating Index, which is now in draft form in the National Green Building Standard, was based on WERS. So this information on the independent rating institution and the score that a project would be required to have will be included in an administrative guideline. So that's pretty much it that we have for private submetering. And so before we move on to the cross-connection control portion, I wanted to answer any questions that anyone has.
Questions? Go ahead.
Could you just talk a little bit about the tenant consumer protections? So what either at the state level or then what we adopt locally is going to prevent somebody who's doing private submetering, say for a rental apartment complex, from marking up the price of water to their tenants?
Right. So the state code does say that they just have to pass along our rates. It also limits how high they can charge like an administrative fee if they have a third party do the billing for them.
Okay.
It creates a cap for that. It also limits, it says they can't turn off a tenant's water usage for non-payment. It has it's very specific and detailed on what has to be included in every water bill. The landlord has to be able to provide the tenant's hour number as the actual water provider. So if the consumer has questions on what our rates are, we can talk to them. It also, I believe the landlord has to be able to provide the tenant the information for the sealer for weights and measures. So if they do have concerns that their submeter is not operating correctly, they can get in contact with the county and request that they look into the operation of their submeter.
It kind of does a pretty good job of passing along whatever rights I would have dealing with the city water right down to the tenant dealing with his landlord, right?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Jordan, yes, it's very detailed.
And then poster child for this, just so I have it, would kind of be the hole in the ground right now across from Paradise Cafe, right? The older Craviota building, because I don't remember. It's 35 or 40 units. You're not going to put 35 or 40 little boxes out on the sidewalk. They're going to try and put them somewhere inside the building somewhere. It's all a rental. It's essentially all a rental thing. So you would have a master city meter outside and then a bunch of private sub-meters inside for each apartment, right?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Jordan, yes, that's correct.
Okay.
So we would make a judgment call if it's appropriate to fit all the meters in the right-of-way, considering all the other uses of the right-of-way that we need it for, and then if it's deemed that it's not appropriate to put all the meters in the right-of-way because of how dense the project is and how many meters would be required, they would be put on private property.
Specifically targeted right now probably really at AUD projects because they're just problematic. So in the sense where they're parked on the ground floor and then the developments above, the meters would probably be somewhere in the garage area. If those were public meters on private property, you would have to get a easement to walk in somebody's 34-unit garage to read those meters. You'd have to go through all those steps that were on that thing?
Our attorney is shaking his head
Really?
yes.
Okay, that's too
We
bad.
currently do that. We've already had a half a dozen projects that have gone through, and yes, we have easement for the physical meter, and then we have access
Wow.
easement as well.
It's a shame. Okay, thanks.
So just wanted, Mr. Chair, Commission, just wanted to kind of add to this. You know, staff has been looking at this probably for at least the last year, trying to find something. There is no perfect solution. I think our desire on our side is to always have that relationship with our customer. They feel like they can call us. We have the data on their water usage. We can help them understand their water usage. And so I think we were struggling because we really wanted to retain that, but also recognizing that as our community changes, we need to be flexible to these new developments and how they work. And so offering this private metering thing, again, if someone has a concern or question about their bill, they're going to have to get their water usage from their property owner or from the tenant, whoever billing them, the HOA, and then they can bring that to us, and certainly we'll continue to work with them. And we're also trying to figure out how we can continue to get our messaging out when we're asking for conservation. How do we make sure we can get that communication also inserted in their bills and passed through from the HOA? So, thanks.
Okay.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the Commission. My name is Maggie Heinrich. I'm a Water Resources Specialist for Water Distribution Section, and I will be presenting to you the revisions to the Cross-Connection Control Ordinance. So the cross-connection, what is a cross-connection, basically, so you understand what we're trying to protect. It's a actual or potential connection between the public potable system and any other source or system. It can introduce pollution, contaminants into the drinking water system through backflow. And backflow could be just water flowing back into the system through back pressure or through it being siphoned back. It is prevented with the installation of backflow preventers. And backflow preventers are required for irrigation systems, swimming pool fill lines, restaurant equipment, hospital equipment, things like that. This is an example of a pretty common, easy to see cross connection, a picture I took on a job site. They're using the hose for construction water, and they left the hose in the muddy puddle there. So what could have happened is if somebody hit a fire hydrant in the street pressure would have gone to zero, and water had been siphoned back into the home or possibly into the public water supply. Simple protection to that would be a vacuum breaker and a hose bib, but it's just a good graphic example of what can happen in a closed system in a home or in a business as well. Here's one from a janitor's closet, and you can see that there's a lot of chemicals hooked up to the system as well as water. And they mix the water with the chemicals and get their cleaning solutions together. And it's a common thing we see in businesses or even in multifamily areas, but that's protected also with a backflow preventer. It could be a pressure vacuum breaker up inside of it. It could be some sort of support in there, and we're requiring those as well. So that's an internal one. And this is an example of water theft. This is a large double check detector backflow on a fire line. Fire lines are unmetered water. Somebody hooked up a hose ahead of even the bypass meter, so they're getting free water essentially. And this happens, sometimes a gardener will hook it up because it's handy there and the property owner doesn't know. There's all kinds of reasons, but we do seek to enforce on that and prevent that whenever possible.
Go ahead.
Quick question, is there actual turnout on the side of the city's piping there that anybody can just walk up and stick a hose on?
Yes, those are test ports there for the backflow.
I see. Okay, thank you.
This is a reduced pressure principal backflow. I thought I'd provide that so that you could see an example of another very common backflow that would be on your standard irrigation pool fill line or something that could provide protect against items that could get you sick if it came back in the water system. State Water Code does require the implementation of a cross-connection control program and the requisite city, local, or ordinances to define our authority, our responsibilities, our policy, our procedure. It spells it out pretty well in Title 17. The city currently has an active cross-connection control program that we took over from the County Department of Health in the early 1990s. We do not have a comprehensive ordinance as currently required by law. What we have is we pull from different areas of our current municipal code as well as the plumbing code and reference the state code. So we pull from a number of places to provide our support for our program, and what we're proposing is something that will put it all in one place. The existing code language is vague and doesn't cover all of our requirements and components and doesn't provide us with the clear enforcement authority that we need. Our proposed ordinance would be modeled off of industry standards. USC Foundation for Cross-Connection Control is an authority on it. They have provided draft ordinances, and those draft ordinances are actually the base of ordinances throughout other communities throughout California. The ordinance also provides clear language for our requirements, the program implementation, enforcement, all in one location. It provides authority to bring customers into compliance with the program requirements and with the plumbing code. And it better protects our public water supply from any potential contamination.
And then, as I mentioned earlier, we just have some additional miscellaneous Title 14 changes. And these changes mostly just clarify and update various policies within Title 14. And as you can see in the staff report, we have a chart laid out for you that lists all of the different changes. And we're not going to go over them individually here, but if you have questions, feel free to let us know.
Great. Any questions from the commission? Michael?
How come nobody else has questions? So I just get asked now and then, and I bluff off an answer on backflow devices for irrigation, for landscaping irrigation. I just say, oh, that's because it needs a backflow device, and kind of walk away really quickly. So I understand, like, when something's in a pool or something's got some fluid in a line between them. But is the irrigation issue, too, that you actually just don't know if the end of the irrigation line is out there in standing water? Is that why the concern is there?
Commissioner Karen Davison, Commissioner Jordan, yes, that's exactly it. You don't know what's hooked up to that irrigation system. Some systems have pumps attached to them. They'll put in additives. They'll put in all kinds of things. You have animal waste that could land on a sprinkler head, and that could be in a low point and draw that water and the waste in. It's just a very unclear
But it could
deal.
be fertigating, whatever. Okay.
Yeah, even
All
if
right.
they're doing nothing, if their dog goes in the backyard, they could be creating some hazard that we
Okay.
wouldn't want to drink.
All right, and so we err on the side of just apply them to any irrigation system, right?
Correct.
Okay.
I feel like in my program, if you never hear about this program, we're doing our job right because people aren't getting sick.
Okay. Okay, thanks.
Barry?
Mr. Chairman, I didn't read all of this language in complete detail. However, on page 15, under private fire service, in the first sentence that's underlined, I think you've missed an if. The city may disconnect a private fire service connection if the backflow preventer or detection meter are not installed and maintained as required, or if, and it goes on. So I think you're missing the first if in there, just a minor wordsmithing.
We received a letter from Art Ludwig, which had lots of discussion, which most of it was all clarification, but I'm sure staff will take a look at that at some point. He did have a question. He wanted an addition just to show that rainwater harvesting and gray water systems, if separated, didn't need to have backflow devices. That's the only thing I saw of any questionable substance for me. Is that true? Or would you support that?
We review the ones that require that, and yes, we only require them when they're hooked in and there's a problem.
Yeah.
So if they're put in per code, per design, I would never require backflow on it.
Yeah, he I guess, knowing what his interest, he just wants it specified. So
Right.
that's
So
cool.
I look at that when I plan check.
Yeah.
It's just one of the many things I tick off.
Right.
And I think that's one of the reasons we didn't specifically state it in the ordinance, because there's already design criteria for it.
Right, correct. Megan? Yep. Okay.
So I'll move the staff recommendation to council.
Second.
A motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
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 Thank you very much. Oh, Kristen?
Was it going to council or to ordinance committee, both of these?
It goes to ordinance committee next.
Goes to ordinance committee first, and
tried
then on to,
Sorry.
then on to city council.
So
Thanks for your
to just
presentation. Good
revise
to
that
see you,
to
Megan.
ordinance.
Okay. Item E, appointment of sea level rise adaptation ad hoc subcommittee members. We're gonna arm wrestle for this, or we're just gonna appoint Megan? No, I'm gonna. It's all yours. Does anybody else want it? Okay, motion to appoint Megan.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
if I were going to be around, I might put my name in contention since coastal process geomorphology is one of the things I do. But I'll support Megan in this case,
Yeah.
So you're telling me I can call you whenever I need?
whatever you need.
Commissioner Callaway, welcome you back at any time.
Well, Megan, I'd love to do it, but I
30 centimeters of sea level rise. I'll be back.
there you go. I'd love to do it, but I think by consensus we're going to appoint you.
Okay.
So you are appointed.
Okay.
Fantastic.
So, Commissioner, have any questions for Melissa on this?
No.
Nope. You good?
Good very good presentation.
It's, what is the projection on timeline and time commitment on this? It's probably in here, but I'm not reading it. I was actually staying out of this because I know it's going to pick up 2 planning commissioners,
Yeah.
but they're already on the subcommittee. But if you want 2 from here, I could think about it.
So the council actually formed it with 8 members, and so only 1 member from the Water Commission.
1 from here?
Yeah.
Oh, perfect. Okay. Sorry.
Okay.
Good.
Do you want to hear about the commitment? Or?
Call me.
Great. Excellent. Okay, we move on then to Water Resources Managers Report.
Commissioner Davis, we'll just go down through this pretty quickly. I want to save some time for Lisa. She's got some updates on the wastewater as well. Everything in our production reports is tracking pretty closely. Gibraltar, we did bring down a little bit of water, 46 acre feet. That again, we're trying to utilize that source, but our planning has us using nothing. 46 acre feet isn't a whole lot there. You'll see we also we'll have some well production now. We got at least 2 wells going in storage unit 1, and desal is 2 acre feet shy of our goal for that month, so it's doing really well. And let's see, turning to page 3, I was just kind of noting the 12-month running average. Can kind of see in the October 2017 timeframe, we kind of hit the low for our GPCD 12-month running average. It seems like we've been kind of climbing up just a little bit. So just kind of keep on that. I mean, still conservation at this point has still been incredible. And let's see what else I want to make a note of. We've added lake projections after Kachuma. I don't think everything else is pretty self-explanatory. I did want to mention staff is working on a high water bill relief policy. We currently have one. You're allowed 1 extraordinary high water relief 1 time every 5 years for leaks or related to leaks. And so we're revisiting that policy given the cost of water, trying to make sure that policy still applies. And once we do land on something, we'll bring that back for the commission to chime in on. I will be on vacation in July, and Kelly Dyer will be handling the Water Commission meeting. Community Choice Energy is going to council on July 17th. I understand that they've arrived at something that may work. More details to come on that. I have been engaged in the Strategic Energy Master Plan. We have selected a consultant, and that will be going to council as well. Certainly with water resources being the bulk of the energy usage for the city, we'll have an active part in that. Consumer confidence report is in front of you and has been mailed out to our customers. And as far as the desal plan, it's been operating pretty continuously. The last week or two, they've had some communication issues, and so they've been replacing some wiring to address those. But overall, plant's been operating per plan, and we are honing in on an open house now in August. But once we have hopefully shore that up, next meeting we'll have a date to give you. And negotiations are ongoing with Montecito. Nothing to report out on that. And I don't know if there are any questions on that. And I'm going to turn it over to Lisa to talk a little bit about wastewater, a little more about wastewater.
One game. So I noticed in the report that we put on consent that we're running a couple groundwater pumps again, and so our now that we're in summer season, our usual bar graph that we would have seen then includes some use of groundwater again, right?
That's correct.
Has there been any chatter at all about raising the flag again on not allowing watering turf grass in order to better conserve groundwater that we're pulling?
I mean, that was kind of the discussion we had in May, was kind of our water supply strategy, and at this point we don't believe it's necessary. I think we can take a look at that again, certainly this fall. We try to do it every 6 months, so we'll be back in October and November to talk about that again and see how we fared. The hope is that we'll be able to utilize more of water from Gibraltar than we are currently planning, which will provide us that kind of buffer. Our actual storage unit 1 is, and it's complicated to say this, the water level has come up in the basin, which is good. The problem is the seawater intrusion is still there. And so the question is the basin looks so good, we have some capacity to pump it down, but that still doesn't change the fact that at some point we got to keep an eye on how that seawater intrusion is coming, because it'll stop the migration once we start pulling from it again. So we're going to keep an eye on that. I think the discussion for a turf ban would probably be in the October-November timeframe again, when we take a look at how the summer went and how we are with.
I mean, when we're past the point where we
We're
are using the
making a
water on the
difference,
turf, right?
Exactly.
I mean, that was the decision point that we had in May.
I guess so. My editorial comment is I think that's too bad. I wasn't in support a year ago of relinquishing that ban. I think there was only a couple of us who thought that way here, and it seems to me that groundwater right now is the only available local banking that we have. We're using all the water we can run into Lake Cachuma and get out of there because we have to keep pumping water in, using the water we're bringing in, not letting it evaporate, and we can't use any water from Gibraltar. And so to continue to say that we're willing to use that resource on turf grass while we could still see additional inflow into our groundwater, increase in our groundwater or protection of our groundwater, just seems short-sighted. I mean, I get that you say on paper it will work, but on paper it's going to work only till it doesn't work, right? And then we're going to have to scramble to go a different direction. And it just seems like until we got our groundwater reserves back to more than low, I think that's the word you use in the report, they're still low, that it seems silly to be using them. So just be my 2 cents. And I know it's a political time or a political landmine too, but it just seems crazy to expend that resource on that.
My comment is, I don't think it's a political landmine. I think it's bad messaging, basically, to talk about it after the summer. We knew we had a bad winter. We had a dry winter. It's an extremely dry winter. And basically then to go through full summer where you say it's okay to water your lawn, and yet we're hitting our groundwater where we kept saying we need to rest the groundwater. The messaging, I don't care about the bar charts. The messaging basically I think is bad to the community. And I think we had that discussion last time. And I don't think that has changed. And I think when Kristen reports out to the council as a liaison, I think our concerns will get passed on to the council at that point. But I think you're hearing, Joshua, from at least a number of us here, that the messaging relative to the lawn ban watering or groundwater, you know what I'm saying, the watering ban on lawns is something which essentially we're missing that point to the community. And again, to talk about it in October, November, and then say, well, it's raining and people aren't using that water. We already used it through the summer. So I share the concern.
And just to clarify, we don't support watering lawns. I mean, that's not our messaging. We are asking our community to let those go, and what we've seen is that a lot of people have. And I think that the challenge really is one of policing and taking that next step, which is mandatory. And I think that's what we're talking about. But I don't believe that we're supporting the watering of ban. I hope with our messaging that we put out, our water conservation message, that it's clear. And if it's not, then we could enhance that. But we certainly are not encouraging people to water the lawns. We're asking them to let them go. But I think taking that next step it's certainly, that's I think ripe for discussion this fall when we start talking about how things fared.
I do think people have drought fatigue, and I think people have catastrophe fatigue. It's been a really hard year for all of us in this county. But I just looked real quick at the numbers, and in this current drought, if we don't get any more rain, this will be the second worst year. So 2012-13 was 8.88 inches. We're at 11.83. There's only 2 years that were drier outside of this period. So I don't think that's something that the community thinks about. But we're in the second driest year of this dry period. And it's, we're in a pretty tough drought right now. So I think that is just something that we should continue to talk about. And I think as a commission in the community, that's really important for us to talk about. I know I try to do that. We're not out of drought. We're nowhere near out of a drought. We're actually in one of the worst years. So I think we can take some of that responsibility as well.
Chairman, regarding the groundwater resource itself here in Storage Unit 1, if we look at the chart, it has come back up recently in most of these wells. We're not doing, as far as I know, any artificial recharge. We're not releasing water down Mission Creek. So the recharge to the groundwater basin would be mainly either through infiltration through the floor of Mission Creek, mainly in the upper reaches where there isn't any flow right now, so that's probably not happening, or an underflow coming out of the mountains. And we look at the Mission Tunnel flow, we see it's been higher than projected for several months now. It's possible that that corresponds to significant underflow coming out of the mountains, and that's what we're seeing as recharging the basin. So to call that banking water is it's sort of fortuitous that the groundwater levels are coming up, and we can't point at really a particular reason except perhaps the underflow is significant.
See, Barry, we're really going to miss you.
Kelly knows this stuff.
I know, but again, that was my opportunity basically to put that on the record too.
Thank you.
Okay. Lisa.
I'm here to talk a little bit about wastewater. I'm going to start with the SSO events. I'm pleased to say that last month in May we had another no spill month for public spills. So we're holding at 5 for the year with about 59% of total gallons spilled recovered. 4 were from roots and 1 from debris for 2018 so far. Most of the rest of the focus of my presentation is going to be in spirit of our upcoming shift to resource recovery. So you'll see a lot more about some of the things that we do down at El Estero that you may not have be as familiar with or haven't heard about for a while. As far as biosolids, that is our biosolids that we haul off every month. That's by month going back to 2016. We're fairly stable in what we haul out. We have the blue is to our hauler up in Kern County, which is Liberty Composting, and the black is our in-county composter, Engel and Gray. So last month we hauled about 182 tons of biosolids. Here's a chart showing our chemical usage for years 2016 to present. The bars, the green blue, those are the chemical usage for wastewater treatment, where the purple on top are our chemical costs for tertiary. Last month, our total chemical cost was about $37,000, and almost 28% was attributed to tertiary treatment. This is power consumption. On the lower, the blue-green, that is what is powered by cogen. On the top in the black, that is what is coming from SCE from the grid. And the yellow line, that is our percentage of the plant that is powered by cogen. Last month, we were about 74% of the plant was powered by cogen. And an exciting thing is if you see a couple months back in on the graph, we are over 80% in a couple of months this last spring, which is very exciting. And then here's fog. This is what we are receiving from Marburg on a monthly basis. Last month we received 68,000 gallons from Marburg, which helps us to produce gas and run our cogen system. I think traditionally Joshua has provided you influent flow, so here's what our influent flow looks like for 2018. We're trending pretty much in line with the previous 3 years. We are at about 6.1 million gallons per day for influent flow. For effluent, what's going out our outfall is about 5 million gallons per day. Our tertiary production on average in May was about 1.1 million gallons. And for the month of May, we produced about 34.5 million gallons of tertiary treated water that went out to the community and El Estero for use. Here's some updates on some upcoming issues and projects. We had an emergency purchase order that we had to have issued this last month for collection system work. We had our staff, they were cleaning, they pulled back clay pipe as part of their cleaning process. We went in, we TV'd it. There was a very bad defect on that pipe. It was very unusual because it was about 13 feet deep. It is an 8-inch clay pipe, and it has a lot of flow on it. To complicate matters, the defect was right underneath a 60-inch storm drain that was by the county, and so it was encased in a concrete cradle. Very challenging situation. We looked to our on-call contractor, Tierra, to help us with fixing it, but excavating and accomplishing it in the traditional dig and replace emergency repair wasn't a good solution. So staff worked over a couple of nights to get rid of some of the jagged pieces of the defect, and then we had our liner in this last week. We did a quick spot line using a UV cured, and then we did a spiral wound last night or Tuesday night, and so the whole pipe has been rehabilitated. It went through an emergency procurement process, but it was a result of a very successful way to deal with a pipe that could have catastrophically failed and caused a huge spill because of the flow. So we will be going to council on July 17th to request approval for retroactively approving the purchase order. One thing you see here is our tertiary treatment facility. That's the above ground piping in between the feed pumps, which are on the right, and our strainer, which is pictured on the left. You may recall that about a year or so ago, we had a catastrophic failure of this piping. We've had that twice in July. We're in June. We've had that twice this month already, where we've had catastrophic failures. One was at the beginning of the month. One was yesterday. At this point, tertiary is not up and running because we have a problem with our piping. We have an engineer coming up from Brown and Caldwell to assess it today, and we will have to get back to you on next steps in how we're going to address this. It is actually a safety issue at this point because of the way it is failing. It is putting the operators and plant staff at risk. The electrical project that I've talked about a couple times, we have proposals out, a request for proposals out. Those proposals will be due June 28th, and we'll be back to the commission with a recommendation next month. And then we have also issued a public outreach request for proposals. Those proposals will be due in July, and we hope to talk to the commission about the process in August to go forward with council in September. And that is what I have to report for wastewater.
Okay, just a comment. Our August meeting is generally a work session. So if we talk about it there, that'd be great. Okay. Michael?
Full of questions today. I think on that slide you said 6 million treated, 5 million discharged, give or take, 1 million recycled, right?
Correct.
Are we starting? What are we starting? I'm sure it's in this chart somewhere too. We're starting at Cater within what, 8 or 9 a day generally? 8 or 9 million?
For the city, yeah, I need to look at that because it's somewhere in the 12 to 15, but that includes Montecito and Carpinteria.
In a big year, yeah.
That includes Montecito and Carpinteria. Yeah.
Okay. And then have there been, now that you've had some experience with the desal plant being up at capacity, have there been any permit compliance issues with the mingling of the whatever was our discharge before, and now that we're adding more intensive brine water into it? Are we doing fine there?
Yeah, we're doing fine. I mean, we did have to take the desal offline about 2 weeks ago because we were actually needed to do some work on the sampling station, and we must at all times have sampling going on for El Estero, so we had to take desal offline so that we have 2 sampling stations, but we needed to make sure that we could do that while we worked on the other sampling station. But that just
But our numbers have been fine. And
yeah,
super. Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Good. Okay, that it?
Yeah.
Okay. Takes us to our last item, and this is the recognition of service of Barry Keller. Staff?
So I'm pleased to be here today to honor Dr. Barry Keller for many years of service to the city. I think it's correct if I'm wrong, 1986, is that correct?
I'll believe you. I remember quite clearly myself.
I was 11 years old.
There's a lot.
I'll put 30 plus years of service on the Water Commission, and just really appreciate everything that you've brought. I heard there was some stepped away for a year or two or something of that nature.
Lived in Europe for a year and South America for a year and a half. So
we'll give you a pass. We'll give you a pass on that. It's still 30, yes. But one of the things, I mean, it's been a pleasure getting to know Barry and work with him as I've grown into this position. And one of the things that's been really remarkable, no matter where I've traveled in the state and I talk to folks who are in the field of hydrogeology, is they all know Barry and they all think very highly of you. It's just, it's impressive. It's I'm sure a pretty tight-knit group, but you have a lot of respect outside of the area as well. But reflecting on where you've been, you're an international traveler and worker. I mean, you work in Chile and bring back a lot of experience to share with us here. You actually weathered the last drought, and you were helpful in helping to guide us through certainly this one. You've been through probably 4 or 5 long-term water supply plan updates. And certainly a significant contributor to our groundwater supply management. Played an integral role in the desal, particularly an offshore intake study that we did, and looking at options there, and really appreciate that. And then, of course, your commitment to and support for investing in our infrastructure is really important, and we really appreciate that because it is a message that there's not a lot of glamour and excitement in maintenance of infrastructure, and you've been a champion of that, and from a staff level, and I think from the community, we really appreciate your vocal on that matter. And so I'm really pleased, and I hope that you guys will stick around to join us for a celebration for all of Dr. Keller's contributions to this community. And we have a nice proclamation from the mayor here that I'd like to share with you. Why don't I read it? I'll read it out loud.
Yeah, read it.
Presented to Barry Keller, Santa Barbara Water Commission. On behalf of the City Council of Santa Barbara, we thank you for your 30 years of commitment to the city's water resources. Your vast scientific background as a hydrogeophysicist has helped guide the city through 2 major droughts, numerous policy updates, and hundreds of millions in capital improvement projects. Your guidance on long-term planning policies to sustain water supplies has been instrumental in positioning the city to navigate the worst drought on record. Your 3 decades of service on the Water Commission has unequivocally improved the city's water resources. As you move on to your next adventure, we welcome the opportunity to recognize and thank you for the many years of distinguished service to the city, and we wish you continued success and happiness in all your future endeavors. Kathy Murillo.
Thank you. And I noticed Bendy nodding his head when you said the word 1986, so his memory may be better than mine, but when I was first a water commissioner, Bendy was also. J.J. Hollister and, well, there are 3 more, but, or 2 more.
Charlie Meyer.
Charlie Meyer and a woman whose name I don't remember, Bendy May, but that's not important right now. You know, when I first got on, I had the idea that perhaps there should be a way to store rainwater runoff here in the city, and I learned that really there's no practical way to do that, unfortunately, but other than individual rainwater collections. I think coming up in the next couple of years is going to be very interesting in terms of the management of the Santa Ynez River as a water resource for the South Coast. We saw coming into this last drought, the planning really didn't match what happened to the water supply very well, and we got just about down to 0 there. And as was pointed out by Jim Stubchair when he talked to us, the whole rationale for how the river is managed may need to change. There's a lot more users now than there were when they planned it back in the 50s, and the hydrology may not be what was anticipated. So that will be very interesting, and I'm sorry not to be here for that. And also, as I mentioned before, the sea level rise, the coastal processes is something I'm very interested in, and it should be interesting for Commissioner Burney to do that. So at any rate, thanks for this, and I've definitely enjoyed this whole time, and it's been very educational to me also.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
we
you
will
so
really
much.
miss you. And let the record show we will adjourn the meeting in the honor of Dr. Barry Keller. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Yeah.